I'm here today to talk with Marcia Cifarelli about my 2005 book called Progressive Logic. And the aim of progressive logic is to clarify the value thinking that the progressive movement has followed over the last couple of centuries in the United States. So, Marcia?
Okay. First of all, I wonder if you could tell us what motivated you to put these thoughts together.
Well, I'm interested in the science of values. And value science is a developing area of thought. And science for the last several centuries has been based on the examination of facts, analyzing material things or analyzing the behavior of objects, and value science has been neglected. Value science deals with what people think about as right or wrong, just or unjust, beautiful or ugly, and those things have been left to speculative philosophy. And so I'm interested in the movement to try and reduce that subject matter to a science and distinguish it from its vague philosophical nature.
That sounds daunting. I was given to understand that one could see the values of the country by how the money is spent.
Well, it's certainly an indication. Yeah. Maybe we'll talk about that too.
Yes. Could you explain the difference between articulated values as opposed to intuitive values?
Well, I think that human beings have a natural order of values which has been shaped by evolution. And so over the last several million years, the way that hominids lived was different than the way that primates lived. Primates are creatures who live by individuals foraging, and they don't live by shared labor. They don't live, except for the mother-child relationship, they don't live by helping each other to any great extent. And so the hominids lived by gathering and sharing. And so that distinction made a big difference in evolution over several million years, and it produced a brain that has a natural sense of values, the sense of community and the sense of valuing others, working to serve others or to help others or to cooperate with others. And so people feel an intuitive sense that other people are important. And so a lot of times that intuitive sense gets articulated in different values, like religions have rules for conduct, for respectful treatment for other people, but there's a lot of variety in these rules, and that's one of the problems with values generally, is that there's all these different competing philosophies. But I think that underlying these philosophies, there's this intuitive sense that other people are worthy of respect, and the community, people live in a community rather than individuals competing, although that's a philosophy too. So there's a difference in my mind between what's articulated and an intuitive sense.
Could you then go over the basic articulation that all persons always deserve positive regard?
Okay, so I start the book as a program for analyzing social problems. And so my main objective is to analyze and to clarify. In order to do that, I start with a basic axiom, a value premise. And the value premise is that all persons always deserve positive regard. This is not like the golden rule. This is not a prescription for how people should behave. This is not a commandment like in the Ten Commandments. This is an analytical premise, and I use this analytical premise to clarify value situations, and people can make their own choices. But what I offer in the book is the tools needed to clarify the choices that people have before them.
Then the other distillation that you've used to describe Republicans, some people deserve our positive regard, is that?
Okay, so I take a look at American history, and American history is the focus for the examples that I give, and and I look at how groups in the past have followed this basic premise that all people always deserve positive regard, and I find that in the many different progressive movements in U.S. history, that underlying premise that people deserve positive regard and the reforms that progressives have fought for have been expressions of that premise. Abolitionism and the abolition of slavery and abolition of child labor, allowing workers to have unions, and there's many different forms that express positive regard for groups of people. And what I say is that this premise I distill from those activities. Now, on the other hand, there's a lot of people who are going to say, I don't feel like all people always deserve positive regard. Some people are criminals, and some people are cheats, and some people are rude, and there's lots of reasons to not feel positive regard. But I say that for analytical purposes, this premise is necessary.
Then would you give us an example of ideological enhancement within what you've just told us?
Yeah. First, let me say that from the basic premise, all people always deserve positive regard, I derive 4 value fallacies. Fallacies in thinking about what's important and thinking about values. And one of them is the ideological fallacy, and another is the instrumental fallacy. And then in the positive side, there's an ideological enhancement and an instrumental enhancement. And so the main part of the book is really providing examples for those 4 axioms that derive from the basic premise that all people always deserve positive regard. Now, you asked me about the ideological fallacy, right?
Well, if you wanted to maybe use the Civil War to describe these 4
okay,
concepts.
So if all people always deserve positive regard, an idea that casts people into negative regard is a value fallacy. And from the value analysis point of view, it's a value contradiction. So slavery is an idea that reduces the value of some people in relationship to the value of other people. And as an idea, it's a value fallacy, a fallacy in value thinking, because it doesn't hold slaves in positive regard. It holds slaves in a lower order of value than the slave owners or non-slaves. Another implication of slavery would be the instrumental fallacy, because in the practice of slavery, human beings are used as instruments of labor, and uncompensated instruments of labor, which is a reduction of the positive regard for the human beings. So slavery has elements of both fallacies in value thinking, the ideological fallacy and the instrumental fallacy, and the progressives were the abolitionists, and long before the Civil War began, the abolitionists were advocating the idea that slavery reduces the value of human beings and exploits human labor and should be abolished. And so the Civil War was to a large extent, not entirely, but to a large extent, fought over these value fallacies. And the effort was to make the social conditions consistent with the value logic of all persons always deserve positive regard.
I'm wondering, though, if the abolitionists themselves actually did regard an individual slave or black person positively, or if there's not shades on their side also of...
Probably lots of shades, yeah. And I don't say, like I said before, I don't say that people have to live up to the value premise. I'm saying you use the value premise to clarify the situation. So certainly there's going to be people who were progressives or abolitionists who didn't associate with blacks, or who thought blacks were, you know, whatever, inferior or something. And
not in my backyard.
Yeah, not in my backyard. And so they weren't ideologically pure, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for how do you analyze the situation.
Well, let's look at the abolitionists or the Northerners for a minute, because something took place which polarized the situation and led to perfectly decent people going to war. Mm-hmm. And murdering was a very bloody war.
Yes.
So what, at some point the abolitionists went beyond their value judgments into another arena of superiority or moralism. How would you describe?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think the abolitionists who favored war were themselves committing the same logical fallacy as the slave owners, because the abolitionists had the idea of freeing slaves, and they were willing to kill real people in order to realize their ideal. And if all people always deserve positive regard, then any idea that reduces the value of people is inconsistent with that premise. So there was value inconsistency in the people who advocated war for abolishing slavery, and value inconsistency in people who wanted to have slavery and continue it. And the slavery itself, as I suggest in the book, there were ideas at the time that could have ended slavery without war. The government could have bought out slaves, and the states could have enacted laws that prohibit slavery, and courts could have taken slaves away from individual slave owners who didn't want to cooperate. And so the war was avoidable, I think, but that didn't happen.
Those ideas of using money and so on to buy the slaves' freedom, that would have changed the whole dynamic of the United States if the South hadn't been so economically hurt by the Civil War. Are the damages from the Civil War, the polarization between the North and the South and so on, still with us?
Well, I think they are. I think we have, in the United States, we have regional cultures or subcultures. In the South, there's still people in the South who want to raise the Confederate flag and still consider themselves rebels and still resent Northern intrusion into their way of life. But I don't think that it has a lot of political significance. I think that it has, mostly it's a cultural difference.
At this point.
Yeah.
So this is an instance where progressives were moved to murder.
Some, yeah. That's right. And of course Lincoln had another agenda. Lincoln wanted to preserve the Union, and he didn't want to go into war, but he told the people in his inaugural speech after he was elected that if they insisted on breaking from the Union, that he would use the force of the federal government to prevent that from happening. And so he was even willing to let slave states have their slaves. But his idea was the Union must be preserved. And so more than any other reason, the North sent troops into the South was because they wanted to preserve the federal government, the Union.
Well, the idea that the Union must be preserved, what is that an example of, if that's the overarching?
Yeah, well, certainly one element of that is an idea which is elevated above the value of people, right? I mean, Lincoln was willing to sacrifice lives in order to preserve the idea of the Union, and so there's a clear logical fallacy in that. But like I said, my purpose isn't that all human action has to conform to the value axiom. My main purpose is to clarify the value choices being made. And so Lincoln had to make a value choice, and his choice was there's more good in the long term in preserving the Union, even if it requires killing Northerners and Southerners. And so this was the choice he made, and even though it entailed a logical fallacy, practical action has to be made despite whatever the logical fallacies might be.
And Jewish ethics, we are taught to find the greatest good when we have a dilemma. And that's always interesting, isn't it? That it's an ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no pure good or pure bad in
real life decision making. There's not much purity. Yeah, but the purity comes in analysis and ideas.
You talk about emotions versus thoughts. and the emotions were unleashed both on the northern side and the southern side that led to the very, very bloody war. Do you have anything you'd like to say, or have we really covered that?
Well, yeah, you're right. It was intensely emotional, and there wasn't a lot of rationality involved.
I think what is also interesting in your analysis that the ideas of a more moderate approach were discussed, and that choosing to go with a more moralistic slavery is bad, with a moralistic I have the right idea and you slave owner, polarized the plantation owners.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the emotion, one of the powerful emotions is the one of moral superiority. And each one ratchets up their own sense of moral superiority, and that drives the willingness to contradict value logic and the willingness to kill in the name of your idea. So I think that moved both sides. Like Lincoln said, God is on both sides, you know, and it's a house divided against itself. And so they were both fighting for their morally superior ideas. And I think also that even if you were willing to buy the slaves, if the southern states insisted on a confederacy separate from the United States, there'd still have to be military action in order to preserve the Union. So it's a really complex situation with a lot of things going on.
That's wonderful examples for today, though, because to me those ways of operating are still with us. You moved in your book from the Civil War to child labor, which is something that we don't really talk about or look at that much anymore. Children were considered a national asset, which allowed us to use them. Mm-hmm. How's that any different than now?
Yeah, I think I have a quote from Alexander Hamilton, something to the effect that our children are our greatest resource. And you still hear people talk like that today. But if you analyze the value implications of that statement, you're calling children a resource. And a resource is a thing, a commodity, something that's useful for getting stuff done. And something equivalent to coal in a mountain, you know, or iron ore, and or water. And these things are things. And so I argue that the very concept of children as a national resource reduces the value of children and makes them something to be valued for their usefulness. And when you value something for their usefulness, you run into the problem of what is their value when they're no longer useful. For example, you work the life out of somebody, and then they can't work anymore. What do you do with them? And before we had Social Security and retirement systems, old people worked, and then they went to an old folks home, or they died in the street, or they had to be taken care of by their family. But from a social point of view, from the way a government relates to its people, once they weren't useful resources anymore, they lost their value. And so that's an example of the instrumental fallacy, where it's a fallacy to value people as instruments. And so to call children our precious resource is to say children are really reduced to one of the most important instruments, and the human value involved there is lost.
Well, I've spent a lot of time as a volunteer in classrooms, and I've seen how it works. I've seen children treated as things because they're looked to as an expectation for a test result or something. And what happens is that their childhood is taken away from them, just the same as children who had to work. And when you talk about personal identity and full potential, it's not happening to children today, only to some children who are looked at differently. And you can go into Beverly Hills schools and even La Cañada and so on and see a very different picture of what is a child. And that intuitive values, they're not being brought forth when we look at children. They're still instruments, it seems to me.
Yeah, I agree. It's a complex situation, but that element is prominent, certainly within the situation. And one of the things I would point out is that when you do this kind of analysis, you can see patterns, and then those patterns you can see repeated in different situations.
Right.
So the child labor of the 1800s and the early 1900s was clearly an example of exploiting children as instruments. But that value pattern of valuing children as resources or instruments is also visible in our public education system today, which is a system of producing educated people primarily to enter the economy, to be workers and consumers. And so a lot of our education is focused on the child as economic resource, consumer, worker, somebody who's going to earn money and then buy things and fuel the economy. And so the economic value is given prominence over the individual needs of the little human beings that we put through the process. You know, when people are young, what they want to know is, who am I, and what is my value, and learning to value others and understand others. And a lot of that is factored out, and the focus is on learning what you need to know for the economy.
So they're really put on a track to become either a consumer or a prisoner.
Prisoner?
Yeah. They determine how many beds a prison will need by how many kids in 4th grade are not test below X.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're being ground up. So the school might be the beginning of where people are deriving their meaning by becoming part of a consumer society rather than part of a community. And this is a predominant meaning of life for so many people, is the consumerism.
Yeah, I think that especially in our society, one of the things that children learn in the educational process is their self-image. And their self-image is one of consumer. You know, you see 12-year-olds with cell phones, and they're spending their lives on their cell phones or on the TV games, you know, and they come out, and we have people as adults who feel a sense of emptiness in their lives and turn to alcohol or risky behavior, and we have a lot of social problems. and a widespread malaise with life itself, and the teaching people to see themselves as consumers or as economic automatons whose job it is to make and spend money isn't reaching deeper needs in people. And so you can look at the educational system and you can say, well, you have to treat children in a sense as products because you got to have a system and you put them through the system. But is there a way to enrich the system so that it gets into the deeper needs of the children, you know, and enhances their life in some way that isn't being done currently in the current system? And so I don't want to say stop teaching consumer economics or mathematics or science, but there ought to be ways that you can add to the experience so that children come out as adults who have a richer sense of the value of their life and a richer sense of the meaning of their life, and feel less alienation than is generally experienced in our society by people who've been through the education system but never acquired the mental tools that they need for understanding their own lives and for making their own lives more richer and valuable for themselves.
So you have people who have a sense of emptiness, but they're not totally aware of that emptiness, and that leads them to act and think in certain ways. So let's look at the prison system and the judicial system, because that is run by people who have this emptiness, and you say it makes a great deal of sense, and it's just slightly shocking that our modern system of, it's not a prison system, our judicial system is based on good and evil and revenge from the Catholic Church. And I get a sense that the divine right of kings, where the king was the one who made the decision, off with your head or you get to go free, that each juror now and each person who participates in our system has that sense of power that the king used to have. And so this is certainly an enactment of people not being treated with positive regard.
Yeah, one of my concerns is to look at how government relates to the governed, how government relates to people, and how government policy acknowledges the humanity in people, and how government policy is based on ideas that reduce the value of people or based on actions that reduce the value of people, and how the policy can be used to enhance the human experience, the experience of citizens. So we talked about public education. That's a government institution, and the question is, can this institution be modified in ways that would enhance the experience of life for the people who go through it? And the same questions can be applied to the criminal justice system. Does the criminal justice system treat offenders as human beings, as positive regard? If all people always deserve positive regard, are offenders getting positive regard? And so, obviously they're not, and offenders are the ones who test that premise more than anybody, because victims of crimes want to get revenge and want to punish. And so I look at the one of the sources of our idea of justice, which is the Judeo-Christian idea of eye for an eye and punishment. And then I ask, well, does punishment really enhance anybody's life? Does the victim of crime, are they restored to a sense of happiness by the punishment given to the offender? Is the family of a murdered victim happy now that the murderer has been executed, and can they enjoy the rest of their lives? Obviously, no. Doesn't make them happy because they still have that loss, and so the criminal justice system doesn't really restore people to any sense of well-being that they had before the crime. And also, if you look at the recidivism rates, you see that they're certainly not getting rehabilitated and made into better citizens. The young ones are being taught in prison how to be better criminals and get caught less, and the other ones are just victims of punishment. I follow the psychiatrist Carl Menninger in that chapter a lot, and also I've read recently that Erich Fromm wrote about the criminal justice system in ways similar to what I have said, and his writings had just come out recently about that. So I was glad to see that.
Well, I think the criminal justice system is very important because if you look at the economy of California, for instance, you can see where the money's going. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of money in that system and a lot of human beings being warehoused. And many of them, it's nonviolent offenses. And what happens when you have become a part of the system is your whole life has become really crippled toward getting a basic job and housing and so on once you're released.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So to think of it as punitive, there's really no other way to look at it. And that it also focuses on people of color. Mm. So there's a racist element that seems as though some of the hatred from the South is still with us. Some people consider it a new kind of Jim Crow that's mm-hmm. actually more larger because it's unseen. Mm-hmm. And the numbers are more staggering.
Yeah, yeah. And definitely a class bias.
Yes.
We're people who can afford a private attorney, people who've been charged with a crime, have a better opportunity of escaping punishment if they hire a private attorney, and the people who rely on the heavily burdened public defender system usually have to agree to a plea bargain or take a lesser sentence in order to please the judge. And so I contrast the ideas of rehabilitation with the ideas of punishment, and I ask which kind of system is more consistent with the basic premise that all people always deserve positive regard. Even if they did something bad, even if they're offenders, they're still human beings, and how are we treating them as human beings? And so I agree with everything you said about the punishment and the degradation, and so I suggest that the criminal justice system in our society is really, in my view, it's really a violation of the separation of church and state, because it's so based on biblical Old Testament concepts of justice that it's really a religious institution, and it plays to religious values, and I think that that would be one reason why it doesn't belong in our society, and what we should have is a what's called the public health point of view, where offenders are treated as basically as sick people, and you could consider their offense as a an expression of their own internal struggles to find meaning in life, to feel valuable, and their expressions of their own, in many cases, resentments and hostility, and there's nonviolent offenders who shouldn't have been there anyway. So the public health point of view would look at people as sick people, and how can we help these sick people to become better adjusted and more productive members of society. And so I suggest that from a value point of view, the analysis shows that there's alternatives that would be more value enhancing and less denigrating of the human beings who go through the process.
There are examples of that, too, small examples of in states where they used a more holistic way, especially dealing with the younger.
Yeah, there are instances of rehabilitation.
And the statistics certainly favor that overwhelming. It's also interesting that the system is supported by Republicans and Democrats alike. In fact, Clinton was the one who really upped the numbers of people being warehoused in prisons. And the prison industry, it was Clinton where it started to expand, because he was getting kudos from the Republican, or the, I guess we'd say, Reagan idea of tough on crime, which is really code for who's good and who's bad in this society.
Yeah, it's based on, it feeds off the sense of moral superiority, and the politics of it are pretty ugly, because there just isn't any support in public opinion for a real rehabilitative criminal justice system, and the economic interests are just you know, have all kinds of money at stake in the prison industrial complex, and building prisons and operating prisons, and so the practical politics are heavily against the possibilities for reform. But if people learn to think about values in this logical manner, then, because people have a natural sense, a natural order of values, a natural intuition that other people are worthy of respect, gradually public opinion will shift once people recognize the value contradictions in their political choices. And so one of the reasons for the book is to have something out there to help educate people about the value choices they're making, because people don't really think about the value choices they're making, and so they don't have an opportunity to listen to their own intuition, to their own value intuition. I think that if people understood the choices that they have, that there is alternatives, the public health point of view, for example, I think if that were put out there, and if people were told, now look, you're taking this sadistic pleasure in punishing these guys, and is that what you want to be? Do you want to be a sadistic person? Do you want to take sadistic pleasure? Or do you think it's better as a member of the American community to rehabilitate other members and to get them into society as productive people, rather than simply gratify your own sadistic joy from punishing? And so I think if people looked at it that way and understood these are the choices they're making, that there would be a change in public opinion. And without the change in public opinion, we're not going to see reform in the criminal justice system.
Or any of the other systems.
Yeah, you're right. Public education, same thing.
The economy, too, is certainly swallowing up quite a few people now. even people, Republicans, are voting for Republican leaders who are pulling the rug out from under people economically. And I wonder if you could talk about how Republicans joined Christian moral superiority to corporate interests. How did they do that? How did they make this seamless union that people aren't completely aware of, that would push people to vote in their own worst interests?
Yeah. Well, that's another complex process that occurred. There once was a time when white working people were Democrats, and the class of people who benefited from the New Deal era with Roosevelt, and from the rise of unions, and in the 50s, white working people were fairly unified in their identification with the Democratic Party. But I think that the civil rights movement cut into some of that identification with the Democratic Party, and so as the civil rights movement grew, white resentment increased, and of course the Democrats were behind the civil rights. Johnson understood he would lose the South. You know, he would lose the support of the South when he enforced the Voting Rights Acts and the other civil rights legislation. And so the beginning of the current situation, where you have white working class people united with corporations that exploit them, the beginning of that happened in the civil rights movement, and so we're living with there's also elements of the Christian right leadership seeing the kind of money that they could make and corporate sponsorship that they got for their church institutions, and so they were able to unify the Christian white working class against their own interests and in the interests of the corporations.
When it all comes out, it's still shocking.
Yeah.
Does Obama articulate progressive values?
Well, here's an example of articulating being one thing and doing being another thing. And certainly Obama's rhetoric is, Obama, understands value logic, and his rhetoric shows his understanding of the importance of people, and the government has the power to enhance people's lives, and he understands that completely. But he's not a strong president. He's not like Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson would call people at 4 o'clock in the morning and twist their arms and tell them, "I know what you were doing with your wife 2 weeks ago, or with your girlfriend 2 weeks ago, and you don't want your wife to know about it. Vote for my program." And I don't think Obama has that in him. Obama will say, "Come on, let's be nice," and people aren't nice in politics, and so he's getting. In many ways, he gets walked over, and so his mind is sensitive to value logic, but he's not, and he's a great speaker, and he can get elected, and I hope he gets reelected, but he's not a real fighter. He's not an infighter, and he's too decent to be a political leader.
So even with a Democratic president, which we have now, are we still living in a social Darwin economy?
Well, it hasn't been social Darwin for over 100 years. It's been that was what the New Deal did. The New Deal put an end to the social Darwin economy. That was child labor, and when there were no unions in the Gilded Age of the post-Civil War era that lasted into the early 1900s. So we don't have a social Darwin society, but there's people who would like to reduce the role of government. That's where government intervened. Government intervened in society, created the National Labor Relations Board, allowed people to have unions, and the government enforced unions, and the government enforced laws that favored workers and laws that improved the quality of products. All that is government intervention to make life better for people. And so social Darwinism is the absence of government intervention to make life better for people, and just allowing people to fight it out among themselves and let the strongest prevail.
Isn't that where we're going? It seems that capitalism is unhinged from any social restraints.
Well,
it's a rather predatory.
Yeah, we don't have a pure capitalism. Capitalism also assumes freedom of government intervention.
Right.
Freedom from regulation. We have freedom from regulation in the banks. Under George Bush, when they reduced regulations on banks, and now the whole country is in this recession because the Wall Street guys went crazy with programs that collapsed.
Schemes.
So government has the power and the opportunity to create laws that can enhance the quality of lives for the people in the society. And when Roosevelt intervened with the public works programs, Obama missed that opportunity. There's an example of Obama just being weak. Roosevelt really acted and produced programs that got people working. And Obama could have done that. And he made this comment about, well, the projects aren't shovel ready. Well, that's not the way you get things done. And so he was advised to give $700 billion to the banks that caused the problem, and let the CEOs take their golden parachutes and their bonuses, and he went along with that because he was advised by tough talking advisors. This is what you've got to do, and he's not a tough guy, so he says, okay, don't pressure me, and so this is what happens, and the opportunity was lost for public works programs because we didn't have a strong guy, a real fighter in the White House.
Well, then the seeds were sown for a larger collapse because what is happening now is not sustainable. And, this is my own comment. You say women did get their freedom, but we don't have freedom. And I want to just give you an example of myself, because policies are stacked against women, especially women who are alone. I stayed off work for almost 10 years to take care of my children, so my Social Security is not very big. And I went into teaching, which is often a female career later in life. And so I have a small Social Security and a small teacher's pension, and I lost half of my employment as a teacher because teachers, especially of adult ed, are expendable. Mm-hmm. And so I had to take my teacher pension and my tiny Social Security. The teacher pension was cast against the Social Security, and my Social Security was reduced by 1/3. So I am, on paper, complete poverty. Not only that, but the teacher pension, I pay taxes on. Mm. So these policies have eroded my position in life to where I would have never imagined I would be so precarious. Mm. And I consider part of it because I'm a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my own. I don't think we have positive regard when it comes to the economy or being a mother or our health.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the standard. You're applying the standard that I'm advocating in the book. Is that do the policies reflect positive regard for the people that they affect? And so, letting these things happen, you know, the government has the power to remedy that, to make life better for people in your position. And the question is, will they use it to do that, or will they drift more towards a social Darwinist position where, you know, let the strongest survive and the rest of you are just
Tough luck.
Yeah, trash.
Because you're not. Is there a politician today who does somewhat approach articulating your vision?
Well, I can't avoid my own prejudices, my own biases. Okay,
Okay.
but I offer the book. I try to stay on an analytical level and just say, here I'm clarifying choices between policies, and I'm showing the logical reasons for preferring one kind of policy over another. And so I do show a progressive bias in the book, but I try to keep that down as examples. I think Bernie Sanders is the closest I can think of, but you know, there's other politicians in that orientation.
Mm-hmm. You know, well, how will your progressive logic be known by people? How will it get out? How will the word get out? And enough so that it makes a difference.
Yeah, that's a matter of people reading it and writing about it and getting it publicized. One person can't do, you know, the kind of publicizing that needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, I hope this helps. And when people are presented by the progressive logic, do emotions get in the way of their following through and acting, or their self-esteem get in the way of going forward with a plan? How can we go forward with a plan? You say plan, act, enjoy. What might be an activist direction for us?
Well, it has to be done. The specifics have to be done in Congress, and the pressure to make them do that has to come from the population.
Okay.
So the population has to have their value understanding raised to the level where action becomes important, and then they put that pressure on Congress. They elect people who resonate with their intuition, and then those people go to Congress, and then they work on the details. So I can't specify the details at this level.
Right. The Occupy movement, have they chipped away in a direction that you think could be effective?
I certainly sympathize with the resentments they feel at the economic downturn, and I don't see a policy there, and I see a collective expression of despair and resentment, and really a lack of intellectual organization, and so it's pretty much just steam blowing out of the pot, you know, and then vaporizing in the air.
I did they came to the church, All Saints, Los Angeles, Occupy LA, and I did see, it's so palpable, the joy they had of being together, because they did live together in an extraordinary situation. And you mentioned that joy, and they do know the camaraderie was phenomenal. So they all know that. They all know that sense of community, whereas the rest of us don't. We only do catch as catch can for moments. Because I also believe that community is the only real solution, the solutions that bring us together. I'm concerned that looking with your analytical vocabulary that our environmental degradation comes from looking at the earth as an object, which could be the end of us, actually. I wondered if you have anything to say about that. It's extraordinary materialism that might become rather urgent.
Yeah, in my view, I see human beings as having evolved out of the earth, and so the earth is a part of us. We are an expression of the earth, and so the way we treat the earth reflects to a large extent our own self-esteem or lack thereof. And so, yeah, the environmental degradation is the reduction of Earth to an instrument or a resource is something that is regrettable and should be stopped. But it's a political situation where the people who make profit from it have far more influence in government than the people who see Mother Earth as the product from which we came, you know, and want to treat it respectfully. So,
well, to me, it is an example of how we've become insulated from natural values.
Yeah.
And the value of living as part of the earth was something we all shared in the old days when we lived on a more of a farming economy and the food came locally. So we're like a three-legged table now because we've lost that whole morality.
Yeah.
It's gone, it's forgotten, which is really, people buy food in plastic bags. I wondered if you have any closing thoughts, because we've certainly covered a great deal.
Yeah, my only closing thoughts are that the book is valuable as a way to help people clarify the value choices that they have before them. To understand that all people always deserve positive regard is an analytical position and not a commandment. And from that position, you can evaluate the government policies that are currently in effect and see what their consistency is with that position. And if it's inconsistent, how could it be changed to become consistent with that position? And I really enjoyed talking with you, and thanks for coming.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoyed too. I learned a lot.
Okay.